Hey there, my people! Today, for your viewing pleasure, I will be reviewing the 1994 original, The Crow. If you saw my review of the movie Alien Resurrection, and I do invite you to go over and check it out if you haven't, if you took a look at that, you know I had some harsh words concerning the trailer for the remake of The Crow, which stars Bill Skarsgård. The trailer, peeps, y'all know I felt that trailer was a hot mess. You know me by now. If you're going to remake a classic, and the 1994 original is a cult classic, people, the remake has to be just as good or even better than the original, or just leave it alone. From what I saw of the trailer, the remake is neither. It's a hot mess, poor imitation of a cult classic. Now, here's the setup. If you've never seen the movie, Eric Draven, played by my boy Brandon Lee, is a rock musician. He and his fiancée Shelley are unalived by the area gang. Approximately 1 year later, to the date of the unaliving, Eric crawls out of the grave to exact his revenge, led all along the way by this mysterious crow. Now, peeps, let me give you a heads up. This movie is rated R. There's tons of unaliving and bloodshed. There's messed up language and messed up behavior against the girlfriend of Eric, and you know what I mean when I say that. But in this case, you're going to get the PG version of the movie here. The movie is very Gothic, meaning it's dark with heavy atmospheric tones. It's shadowy, it's tragic, but it's also gripping. It's a haunting tale that pulls you in and takes you on a really good ride. And did I say, my boy Brandon Lee? Peeps, come on. Brother Man brought it in this movie. Now, that's the setup. Let's get into it. The scene opens on Devil's Night, and there's arson and other destructive behavior afoot.
People once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. Crow could bring that soul back to put the wrong things right.
From an overhead shot, we see there's a crime scene. A body's being covered with a white sheet. Standing nearby is the officer in charge, played by Ernie Hudson. He approaches and says, Shelley Webster and Eric Draven, wedding was tomorrow night. One of the officers says, who the heck gets married on Halloween anyway? Another cop says, Devil's Night, what's the count so far? The Ernie character says 143 fires, and the other cop responds, they're slacking off from last year. You see Shelley on a gurney with a little girl standing beside her. Shelley says, tell him to take care of Sarah. The Ernie character says, look, I will. You just lay back. And he says, come on, to little Sarah. Okay, now it's 1 year later, peeps. As a matter of fact, it's 1 year to the very day later. The scene opens on a crow in a graveyard. In the background, we hear little Sarah's voice saying, sometimes, if love proves real, two people who are meant to be together, nothing can keep them apart. Next, we see little Sarah herself at the graveyard, walking purposely past the headstones. She stops and places a small bouquet of flowers at Shelley's grave. Then, she places one single rose at Eric's grave. Wow, peeps. Shelley and Eric were taking care of this kid, and she wasn't either of theirs. nor was she related to either of them. People, they were simply three people attached to one another out of love. Turning to leave, Sarah sees the crow on a nearby headstone.
What are you, like the night watchman?
And we see the crow tapping the headstone as Sarah leaves. Well, peeps, the kid is looking okay. I wonder where she's been for the past year. We see her skateboarding down the street on a gloomy, rainy evening. This setting, which is typical goth, puts me in the mind of Gotham City or Alien Resurrection, which I've recently seen. Watch how this dark setting sets the tone and the atmosphere and the continuing mood of this movie. Next, we see the cop sitting at a food stall, also reminiscent to me of the movie Blade Runner. The cop's name, I've learned, is Albrecht, and he's arguing with the owner concerning the proper way to set up a hot dog. I appreciate Brother Man has strong feelings about this because, you know what, I sort of kind of do myself. He says to the owner, Mickey, you've got to put the mustard underneath first. We see Albright apparently doing this himself. Then Albright says, man, don't be cheap. How about some onions? You know, peeps, you put a little relish on that hot dog, that bad boy would be the jam. Little Sarah then shows up and sits beside Albrecht. He asks her if she's hungry, and she says, you buying? That kid's cute. Albrecht says, I'm buying, and the kid says, okay, but no onions. And Albrecht goes, no onions? And the kid says, they make you fart big time. And Mickey, the owner, chuckles at the kid. So peeps, it looks like the kid is kind of doing okay in her little world. Next, we see the crow, and it's still at the cemetery. It's sitting on the same headstone, and it appears to be looking down at the grave. Wow, dang. The lid on that casket just came open and Brother Man Eric, he crawled right out. Wow. Peeps, remember what Sarah said earlier? It was once believed that when someone passed away, a crow carried their soul to the land of the unalive. But sometimes something so bad happens that a heavy sadness is carried with it and the soul can't rest. Then sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right. Like John Wick, peeps, crawling up off that floor after that beatdown he took, and after the bad guys offed his puppy and stole his car. I guess sometimes you just gotta get up because you'll never rest until you do. Next we see Eric stumbling down a dark alley. There's thunder and lightning and rain, and I guess he's headed to the only home he remembers. We see he's taking off the suit jacket and the shirt. Then he comes to a stop near a trash bin, and there's a crow there. Eric kneels, and the crow is just perched there, looking at him. As for Eric, if you look carefully, you can see the bullet holes on his chest. Eric reaches out his hands and the crow jumps into them, like this was as normal could be. The crow calls, and Eric watches as it flies away from him. As for Eric, he's just kneeling there, baffled, disoriented, and confused. Peeps, that's all I can assume a brother is feeling, because he just crawled out of a grave. Next, we see a timer counting down. Once it reaches 0, there's a high-pitched alarm sound, then this.
What was that?
You wait right here.
Be careful.
I tell you, peeps, this to me is so reminiscent of Batman's Gotham City. It just seems like crime and hoods are running rampant. Next, peeps, we see the Crow on what appears to be a fire escape ladder attached to the side of a building. I'm going to assume an apartment building. The Crow flies off as if it's leading Eric, and I guess it is, because then we see that Eric has climbed up the ladder and inside maybe what's the upper attic or upper apartment of this building. And we see the Crow fly in and perch on a piece of furniture. The scene then shifts to Eric stumbling and walking down a dark hallway. He comes to a door and we can see a yellow crime scene tape across it and a skeleton hanging on the door. Now remember, peeps, Eric and Shelley were unalived on the day before Halloween, so it would appear nothing has been changed or altered since that time. Eric tears away the yellow police tape and goes inside. There's a white cat, and it apparently sets off a flashback in Eric. A flashback to that heinous night. Eric collapses to the floor as the flashback plays out. Peeps, the scenes of that night are playing in his head and on the screen, but you're not going to see very much of that here. But you can imagine 4 to 5 guys busting into this apartment and what's happened to Eric and Shelby. I believe what set all of this off was Eric and Shelley making a list of complaints to the housing department concerning code violations and safety hazards in this building. I'm supposing the boss, who probably owns this apartment building, sent these guys over to handle it. Eric tried to protect Shelley, and he was hit with multiple bullets, and he ended up going through that window, which explains how it was broken. The next scene is this. Okay, peeps, I don't know about you, but I just got a dark Batman vibe mixed with some supernatural, because this crow did get him out of that grave. And it seems like he can feel pain, but his wounds heal super fast. The flashback nightmare is over, and Eric sits going through a drawer that holds precious memories of his life with Shelley. Peeps, this is conjuring up the good, sweet memories. Shelley holding him and saying, "I love you." Her setting a fire on the stove and Eric putting a lid on it to put it out and then says restaurant. And Shelley showing off her wedding dress to Sarah. Peeps, we see their playful times and their loving times. Overwhelmed by all this, Eric breaks a mirror. Then he throws stuff off the table, all the time with this crow nearby. Then he starts to armor up. He covers his face with white face paint. Then he takes some type of, I don't know if it's mascara or some other type of dark theater paint, but he paints his face with it. And he puts stuff on his lips. We see him put on a long sleeve black t-shirt, and we can also see 4 bullet holes on his back. He walks over to the busted window with the crow on his shoulder. It's thundering and lightning, And as he stands there, the lightning illumines his face, and we see the face of a haunted avenger. If we take a brief look back, we see 4 guys standing at the broken window in the apartment. So the targets are these 4 guys and the despicable criminal boss who set them on the sweet, innocent little couple. This boss, I dare say, is likely behind all the nefarious criminal activity in this city. Next, we see one of the hoods, 1010, at the area pawn shop. The shop owner is looking at the rings 1010 brought in, and he's saying they're probably fakes. 1010 then says he's got a leather purse. The shop owner says there's a blood stain on it, and he tosses it down on the counter. Then the owner hands 1010 some bills and says, take it or leave it. 1010 takes the money. A little time later, we see a crow flying through the city, and we see Eric running and jumping parkour style over any obstacles in his way. Then the crow stops and makes a call sound. The crow is just standing perched, and it sees, I think peeps, it sees a building or an alleyway, and then we see Eric's eye, and peeps, I think Eric can see what the crow just saw. The crow then takes off with Eric running close behind. Alrighty now, peeps, I think here we go. We see that Eric has landed in a giant trash dumpster. He lays there laughing like a 1990s version of the Joker, while the ever-present crow is perched nearby. Next, we see 1010 leaning over a trash fire to light one up when he hears maniacal laughter. 1010 looks down the alley, and there's Eric walking towards him. 1010 says, "Why you paint it up like that for?" Eric doesn't answer, he just keeps approaching. 1010 opens his coat and takes out his blade, telling Eric to come on. And peeps, the fight is on. Eric wrestles 1010 to the ground and then tosses him against the building. 1010 hits Eric, who bounces back. Then 1010 kicks Eric, and Eric cries out and doubles over, but he quickly stands up for more. Again, peeps, I think Eric can feel pain, and we know he bleeds, but I don't think Brother Man can get unalive. Finally, Eric has 1010 pinned against the wall, and 1010 says to Eric, "Man, I don't even know you." And Eric reminds him of Halloween 1 year ago. Now, peeps, you know what? Why do thugs want to taunt you with something tore up they did to that person's soon-to-be wife? Why they always go there? Now his blade's all the way out.
Try again. Victims, aren't we all?
Dang. Okay, y'all. Brother Man ain't for play. One hood down. Next, we see little Sarah skateboarding down the street. She stops on a sidewalk and enters what I think is a bar. To a certain extent, I'm hoping it's a bar because the alternative that's in my mind, I don't even want to entertain this kid just walked into this type of a place. She approaches a man and woman at a table who are clearly distracted, shall we say, and looking at the blonde hair on the kid and the blonde hair on the woman, it's sad to think that this might be her mother. Sarah says to the woman, "So I guess you're not gonna be home until a lot later." Dang, this chick is the mom. The guy says, "She's busy, go play with your dolls or something." The kid says, "I don't have any dolls." Sarah then backs away, but she scoops up a handful of bills that are crumbled on the table, and she leaves. Peeps, this is a hot mess. Shelley and Eric were taking care of this kid. They were like a little old family together. And now, with the both of them gone, how in the world has this kid been living the past year? In the next scene, we see the Crow flying past the pawn shop. Inside, the owner appears to have his money laid out and he's counting it. The owner glances up to see a shadow outside the door. "Hey," the owner shouts, "get lost, we're closed." The figure starts to bang his hand against the security gate. The owner says, "Go sleep it off somewhere else, dust head." And he goes back to counting his money. Uh-oh. The owner reaches behind his back, pulling out this pretty big gun, and he walks from behind the counter towards the door, saying, "Gosh darn, creatures of the night." Okay, people, we know "gosh darn" is my translation of what to do, truly said, but y'all know I don't swear. But I thought his creatures of the night comment was pretty good. If you guys remember, Count Dracula said something similar at the sound of the howling of a pack of wolves. Listen to them, the children of the night, with the music they make. Okay, that was my Count Dracula impersonation. And personally, I don't think it was too bad. But interestingly, peeps, in both instances, the wolves and Eric at the door, they are creatures of the night. Both wolves and Eric are nocturnal, meaning their activities and behaviors are conducted at night, as well as connected to night hours, meaning dark and mysterious, and yes, sometimes otherworldly.
Creatures in the night, they never learn.
The owner is walking to the door shouting, "Hey, hey!" with a gun in his hand. Well, the shop owner is sitting on the floor, and Eric says, "Suddenly I heard a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door." Peeps, that's from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Interesting, isn't it? Eric's last name is Draven. If you drop the D, you have Raven. And I'm not thinking that's coincidental. Both the poem and this movie have black birds that lend to a gothic and dark atmosphere. The Raven deals with the bitter sorrow of loss, and the Crow does the same, but it takes it further, guiding this story through revenge and justice. The shop owner is still on the floor while a menacing Eric stands over him. It looks like he's wearing a leather coat. Brother man is all the way leathered up now. Hey, I wonder if that's Tintin's leather coat. Eric says, "You heard me rapping, right?" The owner says, "You're trespassing and you owe me a new door." Then the stupid head grabs his gun that's beside him on the floor. And Eric says this:
"I'm looking for something in an engagement ring. Gold."
Okay, I think we're getting ready to get into something now. The owner says, "You're looking for a corner, BM for brains?" And he pulls back, hammer on the gun, and lets one fly. The bullet hits Eric, and he's knocked back a step. Dang! Okay, we saw that, peeps. Brother man can take a bullet straight to the chest, and it heals up in a matter of seconds. Apparently, with no residual effects because he picked up that dude and threw him across the room, bouncing him off a wall. Now, that's one serious way to get somebody's attention. The owner crawls to his feet as Eric jumps onto the counter. Now I have to hand it to the owner because he come up swinging with a bat. But Eric is no longer on that counter. The owner is looking around for him when he literally swings in front of the guy. Eric is hanging upside down like a bat, peeps. And he says, "Mr. Gideon, you're not paying attention." And he snatches the bat out of the dude's hand and hit him with it. Gideon crashes down on the counter while Eric comes down as well, landing on the counter himself. Gideon tries to swing on Eric, but Eric literally catches Gideon by the wrist. Then he punches the glass case with his other hand and grabs a knife. Okay, here we go. And he slams it down on Gideon's hand. I guess almost like pinning his hand in place there. Eric covers Gideon's mouth and says, "I repeat, a gold engagement ring, yes?"
It was pawned here a year ago by a customer of yours named Tintin. He confided in me before he ran out of breath.
Okay. Definitely hood down. And a calling card left behind. Back at the pawn shop, Eric is tearing the place apart. Finally, Gideon says, "The metal box, the metal box." We then see Eric sitting on the floor, going through the rings one by one. Peeps, you see his eyes are closed as he picks up and discards the rings one by one, tossing them to the side. "No, no, no," he says as he continues to touch them and discard them, still with his eyes closed. Then he picks up another ring and peeps.
I love you.
Wow. Just wow. He says Shelley and slips the ring on his pinky finger. The next thing we see, peeps, is Eric kicking stuff over and piercing open cans of gasoline. He's got the shotgun now pointed at Gideon, and he says, "You have one chance to live." Gideon says, "Look, man, take anything you want." "Thank you," Eric says as he pours gasoline on the counter. "Now you're going to tell me where to find the rest of Tintin's little party pals." Gideon says they all hang out at the pit. He gets on his knees and he's begging Eric, "Please don't unalive me." Eric says, "I'm not gonna unalive you."
Your job will be to tell the rest of them that death is coming for them tonight. Tell them Eric Draven sends his regards.
Is that gasoline I smell?
Gideon is shouting, "No, man, no," as Eric leaves with the crow flying ahead of him. We can see Eric begin to turn, and we see the look on Gideon's face before he turns and runs. Eric aims the shotgun while Gideon is trying to make it out the back door. Then Eric fires. The whole place erupts in flames, with Gideon barely making it out the back door. As Eric is walking away from the fire, a familiar face shows up. He jumps up from behind the car and yells, "Police!" while pointing his gun at Eric. "Don't move!" Eric is still walking, and Albrecht says again, "Don't move. If you move, you're unalive." Eric says, "I'm already unalive." And he takes a step towards Albrecht. Albrecht says, "One more step," and he pulls back the hammer on the gun, adding, "I'm serious." Eric says, "Then shoot." Then he sort of bows and adds, if you will. Then looking up, he says, Officer Albrecht. Officer? A year ago, Brother Man was like a detective. Now he's a beat cop? Now that's a serious demotion, people. Either he did something bad, or he was a good cop in a very corrupt city. Albrecht says, Are you nuts? Walking into a gun? You high? Eric looks at him and says, You don't remember me. Albrecht says, What are you talking about? Eric says, How about Shelley? Do you remember Shelley Webster? Albrecht says, Shelley Webster is unalive, my friend. Now, I want you to move over to that curb, nice and easy, and we're gonna wait here for backup. This is getting too weird for me, Albrecht says. Eric says, Oh, it gets better. Do you know someone named T-Bird? He had a friend who shouldn't have played with knives. Then Eric says, Like the coat? Albrecht says, You're the guy who offed Tintin. Eric says, He was already unalive. He expired a year ago, the moment he touched her. They're all hit, Eric says, looking squarely at Albrecht. They just don't know it yet. Albrecht looks across the street, spotting looters going in and out of the pawn shop. Get away from there, he yells. Then he turns back, and Eric is gone. Next, we see the kid Sarah hanging out on the streets. This kid's life is pitiful, folks. She's all but raising herself. Sarah tosses down her skateboard and pushes off, and there's a cab. We can see that she's grabbed from behind and pulled out of danger. She struggles free and yells at the cabbie, while Eric stumbles a bit, flashing back. You know what, peeps? It's like he flashes back when he touches something like familiar. Remember how he flashed back when he touched the ring? And now he touches this kid, and he's flashing back to a scene involving her. Okay. Then the kid says,
I wish the rain would stop just once.
It can't rain all the time.
Eric?
Sarah turns, and he's gone. Next we see Eric sitting on a hotel's fire escape. The ever-present crow flies by and in through the window of one of the rooms, perching itself on a TV set. You see that Darla is there with one of the hoods named Fun Boy. Suddenly, Eric appears at the open window with a guitar in his hands. Remember, peeps, he was a musician. He climbs in through the window, and as he's walking slowly to the couple, he says, Here, Fun Boy, and he places the guitar down. And Fun Boy takes the opportunity to pull out a gun. Fun Boy points the gun at Eric and says, Take your bird and leave. Eric pulls up a chair and he sits down, and Fun Boy pulls back the hammer. Eric puts his hand right against the barrel of the gun and he says, Take your shot, Fun Boy. And Fun Boy does. Eric yells out in pain, then he turns facing Fun Boy and Darla, and Pete, he looks at them through the giant hole in his hand. This is some kind of movie. Then he turns his head around so it's facing Fun Boy and Darla, and the giant, and I mean giant, wound in his hand heals. Okay, now everybody has stopped laughing now, peeps, and they're looking kind of funny. Eric starts walking toward Fun Boy, and Fun Boy shoots. You see Eric is hit in the chest area, but he just stands right back up, and Fun Boy yells, Don't you ever die! Eric is close to him now, and he rears back and slaps down the gun that Fun Boy is holding, and the gun goes off, tagging Fun Boy in the thigh area. Fun Boy screams out and collapses onto the bed, crying out in pain. Eric jumps on the bed and grabs the gun and says, "Does that hurt?" And he pulls back the hammer. And Darla, look, Sister Girl jumps up out of that bed and rushes into the bathroom and locks the door. As for Fun Boy, the wound was fatal, peeps, and he slumps over, expired. And Eric tosses the gun onto the bed. As for Darla, she's crying and hiding in the bathroom when Eric kicks open the door. Darla is down on the floor in the corner, cowering. Eric simply grabs her up and he's holding her, folks, pretty tight. Peeps, he's got a grip on her wrist and we can see a white milky substance coming from her arm. And Eric says this milky substance, that he don't say milky substance, he say the M-O-R word, and y'all think about it, y'all know what that is. It's bad for you. Peeps, he's just pushing it out of her arm, but I think he's pushing it out of her whole entire system. And so I have to question, is he just pushing it out of her system? Or is this chick kind of being healed from this? Darla turns and she's looking at him. And I think some kind of way this chick is all sober now. Then Eric takes her face and says,
"Your daughter is out there on the streets waiting for you."
Wow. Wow, peeps, that chick is healed. She getting ready to cry behind what he just said. Now remember back when the kid came into that, I guess, bar, or maybe it was the downstairs of the hotel area, maybe a little bar area, and she wasn't even moved by the sight, the presence, or the words coming out of her kid's mouth. She was not moved at all. And now, peeps, those are heartfelt tears coming out of Sister Girl's eyes. Yeah, I think he healed this chick. And with her being sober of mind and sober of heart, and for him to tell her your daughter waiting for you out in the streets, man, there's all kind of ways toe up. Come on, peeps. He did not mean that your daughter is actually waiting at a specific place for you out in the streets. He was telling Sister Girl, you know what? Your kid in them streets. And she is waiting for you to come get her as a mother. And if you don't, them streets gonna get her. Wow, peeps, this dude is deep. He is on a mission, but not just a mission of vengeance, but it seems like with regard to Sarah, it's like he is fulfilling Shelley's last words. And what were those last words, peeps? Tell Eric to take care of Sarah. Okay. Now we see hood number 3, T-Bird, getting into his car. He pulls out a lighter to light one up. We can see the crow flying to the car and perching on the engine. T-Bird looks up at the bird and he glances in the rearview mirror when he hears movement from the back seat. And literally simultaneously, both he and Eric, who's in the back seat, pull out their guns. But Eric has the drop on T-Bird. T-Bird, seeing Eric's face, says, "Who the heck are you supposed to be, man?" Eric says, "I'm your passenger, drive." In the next scene, we see that the car is stopped, and we can hear T-Bird telling Eric he remembers the incident, and what does it matter? It's ancient history. We see Eric with masking tape and a red canister. He's pulling out more tape, securing T-Bird's head to the back of the seat. T-Bird looks at Eric and says, I know you, but you ain't you. You can't be. We put you through that window. There ain't no coming back. We offed you. There ain't no coming back. Then we see Eric putting a bungee cord around T-Bird's foot and the car's accelerator pedal. The car is revving, and Eric stands back and pulls a pin out of, I think it's a flare, and he tosses the canister into the car. Then Eric does this. Next we see Sarah on the couch sleeping, cradling an album cover in her arms. And I'm going to take a guess that it's Eric's album, simply because of how tenderly she's holding it. A noise coming from the kitchen wakes her up, and she sits up and sees Darla in the kitchen cooking. This kid probably thought she was dreaming because her mom didn't do this kind of thing. Remember, we only ever saw Darla hanging out with her boyfriend Fun Boy and on the MOR stuff. Darla asks Sarah how she likes her eggs, up or over. I can't remember. The kid is looking at her like this whole scene is bizarre. Sarah gets up and goes into the kitchen while Darla says, "You loved eggs." Sarah says, "Yeah, when I was 5. Wow, peeps. Look, she even set up the table. Sarah sits down and Darla asks, "So what do you want now? Black coffee and cigs?" I think Darla is feeling weird and awkward and kind of bad because of the person she had become. So she's trying to make things a little light. And Sarah responds by asking, "So what did you take to become Mother of the Year?" Wow. Darla says, "Someone kind of woke me up." Now Sarah's giving her the side eye, wondering. And she asks, "Who?" Because she had her own strange encounter, remember, with Eric earlier. And she's wondering. And Darla stands there looking and likely feeling pitiful. This is probably the first time she's seen her kid while sober in a very, very long time. Frustrated, Darla picks up the skillet from the stove and turns with it, saying, "I was never too good at this mommy stuff." And it's like she's gonna throw the eggs in the trash. Sarah jumps up out of the chair and says,
I like them over easy, Mom.
"You know what, peeps? Just maybe, this is the setting wrong things right part of Eric's purpose. Setting things right between Sarah and her moms, possibly ensuring a better future for the both of them." Next we see Sarah and Albrecht at what appears to be a diner. Sarah says, "When someone's expired, they can't come back, can they?" Albrecht says, "That's what I thought. Are you referring to anyone in particular?" Sarah looks at Albrecht and says, "You saw him too." Albrecht says, "I saw somebody." Sarah looks down sadly and says, "He can't be my friend anymore because I'm alive." Albrecht says, "You want a friend to walk you home?" And the kid looks at him and nods. You know some peeps? With Albrecht and her new mom, I think this kid is gonna be alright. Next we see the top boss of the city talking to his crew at a meeting. He says, "It seems our friend T-Bird," that's the dude that was in the car, "won't be joining us this evening on account of a slight case of being expired." The hoods around the table chuckle and laugh before the boss continues speaking. Outside the meeting place, which looks to be a warehouse, sits Eric with the crow on his shoulder. The boss says, "Devil's night is upon us again. I thought we'd throw a little party, start a bunch of fires, make a little profit." Then out of nowhere, the crow flies in and lands on the table, right in the middle of their hood meeting. The boss says, "How the heck did that get in here?" The crow flies away just as Eric enters. "Gentlemen," he says loudly. The guys are jumping up and pulling out their guns, and Eric, he just keeps walking. He shoves a chair out of the way and hops onto the table, crossing his legs and sitting there. The hood crew has their guns trained on him, and the boss says, "You're him, the Avenger." Peeps, he knows Eric off 3 of his guys. Eric points to that last remaining 4th hood and says, "I just want him." Peeps, this is the last guy in the crew that unalived him and Shelley. The boss says, "Well, you can't have him." Eric responds, "Well," and he stands. "I see you have made your decision. Now let me see you enforce it." The boss says, "This is already boring. Unalive him." Now Eric's gone full-on John Wick in the place, and it's on like Donkey Kong. Peeps, they coming hard at Eric, but Brother Man got a whole lot of something for him.
You're all going to die.
Now you notice, in all this fighting and unaliving, we don't see hood number 4 or the top boss man anywhere in this. All you see are the flunky hoods trying to fight off this one avenging dude. Eric now finds himself alone in the room. The others either unalived or having run away. He tosses the sword away and it lands going right through the table, and Eric hears a noise. Now let's guess who the stoop is hiding under that table. Yep, it's hood number 4. Eric stops and turns towards the noise. Then Peeps, Brother Man is walking slowly and menacingly towards that table. Well, hood number 4 is done for. Next, we see Albrecht at the scene. He sees hood number 4 all squished on top of the car, and he runs back to his car. I'm sure Brother Man has figured out pretty much what has happened. Meanwhile, we see the boss in a car with his sister Micah and his protective security hood, Grange. We see that Micah has one of the crow's feathers, and she says the crow is his link between the land of the living and the realm of the unalive. Grange says, so unalive the crow and destroy the man. Wow, Peeps, I think they just hit on something, because we know that Eric and this crow are linked together, to the point where, if you think back, you've seen where Eric has been able to see through the eyes of this crow, seeing what the crow saw. Okay now, Peeps, what's next? So in order to carry out their nefarious plan, they have to lure in the crow / Eric and take the crow out. And they're going to need bait.
You're gonna say I shouldn't be in a cemetery in the middle of the night, right?
Safest place in the world to be.
I love seeing Eric with her. He's kind and gentle, and you can tell that he really and truly loves this kid. Sarah says, "You're never coming back." Eric doesn't answer, but instead he holds up a necklace and he says, "I gave this to Shelley once," and he drapes it around her neck. And Sarah says, "I'll never take it off." Now that's really sweet. Saying goodbye is tough, Pete. They hug one another, and Sarah gets up and leaves, taking one glance back, and she says, "Bye." The kid is making her way out of the cemetery when Grange snatches her up. Eric is at Shelley's grave with a small bouquet of flowers when Sarah calls out, "Eric!" Peeps, the crow hears her and sees her, and when she cries out again, Eric reacts. Eric! In the next scene, we see Eric running through the cemetery and bursting through the chapel doors. Peeps, these punks have lost their minds putting hands on that kid. The ever-present crow flies in behind Eric, then takes the lead down the aisle. Grange is hiding in the balcony area, and he pops up, rifle at the ready, and he's got it pointed and trained on Eric. Eric stops, and the crow lands on the pew. And that's when we see Grange move the rifle from Eric to the crow. Grange clicks on the laser and he fires. The crow's hit, Peeps, and it falls to the floor. Eric turns to where the crow has fallen, and we see that punk boss coming through a side door with a sword strapped across his back. The pair face off, and Eric says this:
"Give me the girl, and I'll let you walk out of here."
The boss says, "Why don't you just give me a minute to think about that?" And he turns his back to Eric and takes a couple of steps away. We can see that Eric is a little bit confused by this. Then the boss turns and says, "Forget it," taking a gun out of his belt, and he fires it at Eric, hitting him in the shoulder. Eric touches the wound and there's blood. Then he collapses to the ground. Grange lowers his gun while the sister finishes tying Sarah to a wooden beam. Then she heads down the flight of stairs. The boss leans over to taunt Eric, saying, well, it does seem to me that our little life has undergone a rather significant change in the past few minutes. Wouldn't you agree?" And he punches Eric. Leaning over him, the boss says, "For a ghost, you bleed just fine. Yeah, keep running that mouth." Grange is on the main floor, and he sees the crow hopping about.
"It's still alive."
I'd kill it.
Hey, Bertie.
Well, guess who just showed up in the nick of time? It's the cop, Albrecht. A gunfight breaks out with Grange running over to the pews to use them for cover, and the boss shows up to join in. While the pair's occupied shooting at Albrecht, we see Eric in the background, gimping off to the side and taking cover behind some pews. Albrecht is laying down some pretty good fire, and the boss is taking off, leaving Grange to handle Albrecht on his own. Albrecht drops to a knee, aims, and lets loose, hitting Grange with multiple rounds, unaliving him. Next we see Albrecht and Eric talking.
"Just came by to pay my respects, and here you are getting all shot up again. You're bleeding all over the place. I thought, you were invincible."
I'm not anymore.
Peeps, the crow getting shot has somehow minimized Eric, and now he can be affected by bullets. Even though he tells Albrecht he's no longer invincible, I think Brother Man is still somehow enhanced. As long as that bird is alive, I believe he'll stay alive. So peeps, Eric and Albert decide they're going up those stairs for the kid. Albert goes up so far, then he takes a corner that puts him in the shadows a bit. As for Eric, he continues moving up the stairs. At one point, he looks up to see that Micah chick has a gun trained on him and she shoots.
You were supposed to stay behind me.
I think I messed up.
Peeps, it's on now. Eric is heading right back up those stairs, and Brother Man ain't gimping, dragging, or limping. He's walking like somebody with a purpose, and his purpose, peeps, is to end all of this tonight. Eric is on the landing now, face to face with Micah, and peeps, she has the crow, holding it while pointing a gun at Eric. And like all hoods, before the end comes, she's running her mouth.
This is all the power you ever had. Pity there's not more time for us.
Okay, alrighty then. So Eric hears Sarah calling for help. We see an open windowway and Eric crawling to it and out onto the roof. The boss is standing there like the punk he is, holding Sarah in front of him. Eric approaches and says,
You can have me. I won't fight you.
All right.
You know what? I hate a punk who fights dirty. Come on, Brother Man Eric, let's end this. Peeps, the boss is coming at Eric with that sword of his, and all Eric's been able to do is dodge it. Realizing he needs a weapon of his own, Eric spots this oddly shaped metal thing on a base, and he grabs it. People, Eric grabs that thing just as a bolt of lightning hits it, and it's like the lightning goes right through that metal thing and into Eric. Eric pulls it up out of the base and is on like Donkey Kong now. The both of them are fighting near the edge when they both tumble over, coming to a stop a few feet away from one another. Sarah calls out to Eric, "Help!" And just as Eric is coming to his feet, that punk boss spears him in the back. Sitting there now, seriously wounded, the boss kneels beside Eric and says, "What happened back there with you and your girlfriend? I cleared that building, meaning I okayed that. Nothing in this town happens without my say-so. So I'm sorry if I spoiled your wedding plans. You know what? I can't wait, I can't wait, I can't wait." And the boss takes out his knife and says, "I'm going to miss you." Eric says, "I have something to give you. I don't want it anymore."
30 hours of pain. All at once. All for you.
Buddy, I have been waiting for the last one to go. And this one went well. Eric pulls away his hands, and the boss falls screaming to the ground. Eric rescues Sarah, and they go to where Eric left Albrecht. Eric tells Sarah to stay with Albrecht until help comes. Sarah asks, "He'll be okay, right?" And she turns, but Eric is gone. "Eric," she says. Albrecht says he does that a lot. And then we see that help has in fact come for Albrecht. Peeps, we next see Eric at Shelley's grave. Man, he loved that chick. He loves her still.
If the people we love are stolen from us, the way to have them live on is to never stop loving them. Real love is forever.
And there you have it, my people. The 1994 original of The Crow. I said in the beginning, Brandon Lee expired during the filming of this movie due to an accident on set. If you go back, it was during the scene with Fun Boy. Remember, he was in the hotel room with Darla, and I think he was standing on the bed, and Brandon Lee was standing right across from him. And in this particular scene, Fun Boy points a gun at the Brandon Lee character and pulls the trigger. The prop gun malfunctioned or something, and Brandon Lee was hit and he expired as a result. The family and Brandon's fiancée, Eliza Hutton, wanted the film completed. A significant portion of the movie had already been filmed, so what they did was to rewrite some of Brandon's scenes using body doubles and some special and digital effects that were popular at that time. And you see there's an end dedication of this film to Brandon and his beloved Eliza. Peeps, what wasn't great about this movie? The gothic, dark, film noir atmosphere encompassing shadows and the ever-present rain and the style and imagery that is reminiscent of now popular films such as Batman and Blade Runner. Then there's the theme that ran through the movie from beginning to end, and that's the battle between good and evil, avenging retribution, justice, and yes, love and hope. And peeps, the soundtrack is off the chain good. To fully experience it, you've got to watch the movie. It's a mix of alternative, punk, rock, gothic, all of that coming together to enhance the mood and the darkness and the atmosphere of this movie. And then lastly, peeps, come on, Brandon Lee did that job. He owned the role of this avenging anti-hero, Eric Draven. It's just sad because the kid had serious potential as far as I and a lot of other people were concerned. It's just too bad all of that was cut short. Well, my people, that's all I got for you now. I'm really thankful for you subscribers as well as you viewers. You're a blessing to work for. Keep checking back for new content and leave a like if you will. Be kind to one another and to yourselves as well. Bye-bye for now.